Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Rebel Talk podcast. I'm your host, Zach Moreth, and today we have special guest Gator Dave in the house. Be sure to tune in to all the Florida content you need at Gator's Breakdown. Before we get going here, make sure to like and subscribe. Dave, how are you doing, man?
Doing good, doing good. One more big game in the swamp this year, and so looking forward to Lane Kiffin and the Rebels coming coming to Gainesville to put to the bow on the home season.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be a fun one. Unfortunately, I won't be there, but I'll definitely be tuning in. And just starting with the swamp and the environment. Ben Hill is sold out again. Just how much do you think the environment can truly impact this game, Dave?
Yeah. It being a noon game is going to be a little more subdued, of course, as noon games go. But the Florida fan base has got a little bit of a lightning rod in them after the win over LSU last week. So certainly more electric than it would have been after a loss last week. So I think Gator Nation is kind of ready to explode a little bit. Of course, I think getting off to a good start is going to help that. But don't be surprised. It's just kind of a Florida thing. Those students are kind of late arriving for for a noon game, but it's and it's going to be cold. For, one of the rare cold home games in Gainesville. Cold for Floridians, I guess I should say.
Yes.
But yeah, I think as long as it's a close game and it gets later and then it starts warming up a bit, I think the atmosphere will be a lot like what you saw last week against LSU.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And the weather's turning for sure. I mean, here in Mississippi, it's 50 degrees. I'm wearing a sweatshirt today. Yeah, it's chilly, man.
Yeah, here I'm in a jacket as we're recording, and yeah, it's for
Oh
Florida,
yeah,
it is cold. Yeah,
it's absolutely brutal. Just staying on that page, Dave. I'm kind of curious. How has Florida played at home in comparison to on the road this year? Are there any notable differences there?
there were at the beginning of the year. You opened up the season against Miami. You had Texas A&M a couple weeks later, and it was not a good start at home for Florida. And there was one thing Billy Napier had been able to point to was that first big home game of the year. You go back to year one, his first game ever at Florida, that big home win versus Utah. And then last year, the first big home game was Tennessee and got that big win. Wasn't able to replicate that this year, so it took a little while. But ever since that first bye week, and the first game after that was UCF, Florida pounded UCF, and then the next home game was Kentucky. Florida pounded Kentucky, and then got the big win versus LSU last week. So they've turned their fortunes at home. They turned their fortunes around at home. So certainly, I think something to build on as Ole Miss comes to town.
Yeah, absolutely. And with those changes in winning at home, there's also a change at quarterback in DJ Lagway. How can Ole Miss disrupt DJ? And on the flip side, how do you think DJ can succeed against a pretty good Ole Miss defense here, Dave?
Yeah, I think the thing is he's done pretty good when teams bring pressure. And look, Ole Miss doesn't have to bring extra bodies if the pass rush is working like we know it can. So that's what LSU had to do last week. They had to bring pressure. They had to bring extra bodies, and he took advantage of that. I think he's surprisingly been pretty good in that regard for a freshman quarterback. I do think the things Ole Miss could do, probably as long as that front three, front four, that pass rush is kind of what we expect it to be. Play a lot of zone coverage behind it. As a young quarterback, that is where he struggles. If you go play man coverage, he's looking deep, and if Florida's receivers got a beat on a cornerback, he's going to chunk it up. So I do think probably more zone defense to slow him down, and plus if he can run a bit. If a team wants to be in man defense and those routes are run down the field, that gives him some more open space to run if he's able to run. So I do think we, ideally would probably see, from an Ole Miss perspective, a lot more zone than man, and make Lagway have to think about where he's throwing the ball more so than not.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at DJ as a freshman, the things that he's doing is truly incredible. I also want to credit, the Florida offensive line. I think they've given up 3 sacks in the last 3 games. They've done a really nice job really protecting him, giving him the time to go through his reads and his progressions and stay on the offensive side of the ball here. I want to hear a little bit more about Elijah Badger and this wide receiving core, Dave.
Yeah, Badger was a must-get in the transfer portal. He was in that late transfer portal window for Florida. They missed on a couple other targets in that first spring portal window, so thankfully he hopped in the portal. And look, it continues Florida's little track record from Arizona State to Florida. You had Ricky Pearsall, who was at Arizona State before. Florida turned him into a first-round pick at the wide receiver spot. And now Elijah Badger comes in and sets career highs here at Florida. He's either first or second in the country in yards per reception. And a lot of that does have to do with with DJ Lagway throwing the ball to him down the field. But certainly an electric playmaker for Florida. Chimere Dike, the other transfer from Wisconsin, he had played a lot with Graham Mertz at Wisconsin, so there was a familiarity there. But lo and behold, Graham Mertz goes down, but he's still been able to step up. He's doing career numbers at Florida more so than he did at Wisconsin as well. So thankfully, Florida got those transfer receivers because Trey Wilson went down with injury. He's only played like 4 games this year and still very sparingly in those games. So they've thankfully got those 2 transfer receivers to help make up for the loss of of Trey Wilson. And then, we'll see if any other guys, kind of step up there. I've been wanting Florida to get the tight end more involved in the passing game. And we saw a little bit of that versus LSU last week after we kind of hit home that narrative going into that game. But yeah, it really is, the core is led by Elijah Badger and Chimere Dike.
Absolutely, man. It's going to be exciting. That's a really good matchup there with an Ole Miss secondary that has been really good and, also pretty suspect at times. So it's going to be interesting to see, how that kind of unfolds. I want to take us to the defensive side of the ball here for Florida, Dave. Defensive line goes off last week against a really good LSU offensive line. I think they record 7 sacks, 11 tackles for loss, just all around success. Nussmeier had nowhere to go with the football all day long. How did they kind of find success, and what do they need to do this week to kind of have a similar result?
Win those one-on-one battles. That's where it comes down to. Florida didn't have to bring bodies. They brought Shamar James a couple of times, the linebacker on a blitz, and he got home. But they didn't have to do that a whole lot. It was really their guys up front winning. And, hey, look, that was a far cry from what we saw the week before versus Texas. They could not get to Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning at all. And then a week later, LSU comes in allowing 6 sacks all year, and Florida put 7 up on the board. So it really started, I think, with Caleb Banks and Tyreek Sapp. I think those two may have even played their best games as Gators last week versus LSU. Caleb Banks right there in the middle, so was able to create pressure, a lot of pressure up the middle. He would filter. Like, he probably should have had more stats, but he filtered, up the middle, so the guys on the edges could really make the sacks, really make the tackles for losses. Really just a dominant performance by him. And as I said, Tyreek Sapp just lived in the backfield. I think 3 or 4 tackles for loss for him by himself last week, and it started early too. So they only had 1 sack in the first half though, and it had 6 sacks in the second half when the game came down to crunch time. And it was a bend don't break, and LSU only averaged 4.2 yards a play on 92 plays. So it was literally the best definition of bend don't break defense you could get from Florida last week. But when it came crunch time, it really started up front with Florida living in the backfield.
Yeah, no, they were phenomenal. I turned on that game in the second half, and just like I said, Nussmeier, he had no time to throw the ball, couldn't go through his reads, just disruptive.
And he got hit. I mean, it wasn't just taking him down softly. I mean, he was getting pounded pretty hard.
I thought he was going to leave the game at one point. Yeah, they were getting home. So staying on the defensive side of the ball, there's no question. Ole Miss, you got Jackson Dart, Trey Harris coming back. It is an elite wide receiver core. Just how does Florida try and limit such a talented offense in Lane Kiffin's system?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of the same. As I just said, bend don't break. You got to hope that pays off again this time. Ole Miss, one of the most explosive offenses in the country. Florida's given up a lot of explosives. But if you go back and look at it, it's a lot of those first few games where Florida just really struggled on defense. And they got that first bye week, and they have settled down a bit, play a lot more too high. They're trying to really, limit those big plays. And it has made a difference. They'll still give some up, but nowhere near the rate they were at the beginning of the year against Miami and against Texas A&M, against Mississippi State as well. They've really calmed down the explosive plays, and amazingly so, because they've had a ton of injuries on the back end. Cornerback 1, Jason Marshall, went down against Kentucky. Jakeem Jackson, who was supposed to be, or Devin Moore, cornerback 2, he went down versus Georgia. So there was a 2-game stretch there. You lost your top 2 corners for the rest of the year. Jakeem Jackson was corner number 3. He had been hurt already previous to beginning of the year. So Florida's on cornerback number 4 right now with Devin Moore. My bad, D.D. Johnson. So he's quarterback number 4. Now he's quarterback number 1 to go along with Twycrest Bridges, who was having a pretty good season at safety. He's playing the other corner spot right now. And thankfully, Florida got him in the transfer portal as this versatile piece. He could play corner. He could play safety. Started the season playing safety, but because of all the injuries, have had to move him to corner, and he's played pretty good there. So, but a lot of where the big plays come from is that safety spot. And Jordan Castell, a sophomore there, hadn't necessarily taken the steps we thought he would take after a pretty good freshman season last year. And then you lose, Trockwest Bridges at safety since he's playing corner now. So you're playing some other guys at safety, but Bryce Thornton, I think has played pretty well, but there's been really a lot of good playmaking ability there at the nickel spot with Aaron Gates and Sharif Denson. They'll rotate those two guys there at the nickel spot, and there's not much of a fall off, if at all, with those two guys, so they can rotate and feel comfortable there. So it really is, I think, a lot of the mindset of it's going to be bend, don't break again, and to see, knowing that Ole Miss can have an explosive offense, see if you can have them settle for some field goals and just not give up the big play.
Yeah, and that was something they did really well last week. I think LSU maybe kicked 4 field goals, and on the road, you have to score touchdowns in the red zone, so it's going to be crucial that Ole Miss is able to do that if they want to win this game. You talked a lot about injuries, Dave. I wanted to bring up the injury report from last night. There were quite a few names from that Florida list, a lot that Ole Miss fans are unfamiliar with. Just anyone that stood out to you on that list.
Yeah, most of the ones I just went through in the secondary, of course, they've been there for the last few weeks. But the one that I wish was back this week was Pup Howard at linebacker. He missed last week against LSU. He tried to give it a go against Texas. I had since learned that he got a high ankle sprain versus Georgia and just tried to play versus Texas. And I could tell I got a kind of a personal relationship with him. So I watched him pretty close, and I was like, there's something that doesn't look right. And then found out he got a high ankle sprain versus Georgia. So he's going to miss his second straight game. Florida hopes to have him back next week versus Florida State to close out the season. But nothing else too surprising on there. A lot of those outs have been guys that have been out for the rest of the season, like a Graham Mertz who got hurt earlier this year. Maybe we thought Florida could get back offensive lineman Devin Manuel, but he's going to miss again. But he had missed last couple games as well. But really the only one that come as a mild surprise, only because we thought we might get him back this week, was Pup Howard at linebacker.
Yes, sir. And on the flip side, it's a very similar situation for Ole Miss. I think the only questionable guy is running back Logan Diggs, and he hasn't played a snap all year. So it should be a pretty healthy game looking at both sides. Last question here, Dave, just to wrap things up. Ball snaps less than 24 hours here. I got to get your score prediction, man.
If I can remember off the top of my head what I put on the podcast, it was 31-20 Ole Miss or 34-20 Ole Miss, somewhere in there. I think it's 34-20 Ole Miss is what I had. I just think Florida is playing better. I think it will be a second half game, but I think another explosive late probably puts the game away in favor of Ole Miss.
Yes, sir. I have Ole Miss winning 31-24. Again, Florida, it's going to be a great test, and there's no question that they're able to get this upset, if they played a high enough standard and Ole Miss plays down a little bit. But I think Ole Miss is rolling right now, coming off a really good Georgia win, getting healthy over the bye week. And, as an Ole Miss fan, I'm hoping that's enough to go into a really hostile environment in the Swamp. Like I said in the beginning, make sure to drop a follow to David Waters at GatorDave_SEC on Twitter. Tune in to GatorsBreakdown.com for all your Florida sports content. Dave, I really appreciate you coming on, sir.
Zach, thanks for having me, man.
Yes, sir. Like and subscribe, and go Rebs. Hotty toddy. Thanks, guys.